The world was white, cold, and quiet. Too quiet. 4 hours, maybe even days, the alien mother, Nithril, had fought the Stygian Peaks blizzard. Every step was agony. Her blue skin was cracked and dry from the bitter cold. She was out of food, out of shelter, and dangerously low on hope. And then there was Ashkari, her baby boy. He was too still. Too silent. His breathing was softer than a snowflake landing on the white ground. Nithril knew with chilling certainty that the snow would take them both tonight. She sank to her knees, clutching him one last, desperate time. She couldn't save him, but she could give him one thing, a goodbye. She pulled him close and began to sing the slow, sacred lullaby of her people. It was a song of mothers before sleep, but tonight it was a song of final, pure love. Her voice broke, humming through the icy wind. But just as the darkness started to claim them, Nithril heard something impossible, a crunch. Not the wind, not the snow, but the sound of boots on the ground getting closer. And walking toward her, through the howling white, was a man. A human. Alone. And in this desolate, frozen wilderness, that human, Isaac Thorne, would make a choice that changed not just their lives but the very meaning of survival. Stay with us, because what happened next is an incredible story of unexpected kindness, desperate motherhood, and a fight against a relentless enemy that will redefine what it means to be family. Before we dive into the heart of this incredible true story of sacrifice and redemption, I have a quick favor to ask. If you are already hooked by Nithril and Ashkari's struggle, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It's a tiny click for you, but it's the biggest signal to YouTube to share this story with a larger audience. Also, subscribe and ring that notification bell. We bring you deep, emotional sci-fi stories like this every day. We want you to be the first to hear them. Tell me, from which part of the world are you watching this story right now? Ready to see how a simple hunter became the last hope for an alien mother and her dying child? Let's get into the incredible journey, starting with... The world was ending not with fire but with ice. The Stygian Peaks were a monument to unforgiving nature, and today they were claiming their prize. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed like a tortured spirit, a soundtrack to Nithril's despair. Snow fell relentlessly from a dark, crushing sky, burying everything in a seamless, suffocating white. Nithril, the alien mother, could barely feel her own pale blue skin. It was dry, cracked, and rough from days of exposure. Her arms, which had carried her child, Ashkari, for an impossible duration, were shaking violently. She had walked for hours, maybe it was even days, without the basic needs of life: food, shelter, or most critically, hope. Her legs had ceased to function properly. They were heavy, unresponsive weights beneath her. Clutched tightly to her chest was Ashkari, small and tragically weak. He hadn't spoken in hours. His eyes were closed, his breathing was barely perceptible, faint and shallow. Nithril fell to her knees in the drift, the shock of the cold ground momentarily waking her. She pressed her face close to his and whispered, "Please don't sleep, my little star. Stay with me," using their native tongue. But the small body was terribly cold, unresponsive, and his lips were beginning to turn a dreadful purple. Looking up at the unforgiving, white-out sky, Nithril blinked. The tears that slid down her cheek immediately froze, turning into tiny, painful shards. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice fractured by the wind and her own grief. "Mama tried. I truly tried for you." This wasn't just a simple apology, it was the confession of a mother who felt she had failed her most sacred duty. She pulled him closer, the contact her last remaining comfort, and began to sing. It was a lullaby, soft and heartbreakingly slow, the ancient song sung by mothers of her species to guide their young into peaceful sleep. But this time it was a farewell. She rocked gently, trying to hum over the noise of the cruel wind. Snowflakes melted momentarily on Ashkari's face before freezing again. Her beautiful voice cracked under the weight of her emotion, but she forced herself to keep singing. If this was the end, her final moment, she wanted the child's last sensation, his final memory, to be the enveloping warmth of her love. Lost in this moment of pure sorrow and song, she missed the approaching figure entirely. She didn't register the rhythmic, distinct crunch of boots on the snow, closing the distance. But someone was indeed marching toward her, Isaac Thorne. A human. Isaac was a seasoned veteran of the Stygian Peaks, a man whose beard was permanently roughed by the wind, and whose eyes carried the tired wisdom of long isolation. He was just returning to his small wooden cabin after a multi-day hunting trip when he spotted the strange, dark shapes against the overwhelming white. At first, his mind, geared for survival, registered them as just an animal, perhaps a wounded deer. But as he moved closer, the shapes resolved themselves into a clear, heartbreaking tableau. A mother, her arms fiercely wrapped around a small child. Isaac immediately picked up his pace, his hunter's instinct overriding any fear. Nithril heard him then. The unfamiliar sound tore through her grief. Her body instantly tensed, recoiling into a posture of fierce defense. Survival mechanisms, long dormant, flared. She pulled Ashkari even tighter against her body and lifted her head, her multifaceted eyes wide and wild with a panic-fueled fear. She opened her mouth and let out a sharp, guttural warning sound, a hiss torn from the depths of her throat. The human stopped instantly, respecting the clear boundary. He slowly raised his hands, palms open and empty, a universal gesture of peace to show he was completely unarmed, his hunting rifle slung over his back. I'm not here to hurt you, he said, his voice calm, deliberate, and low against the wind. Nithril bared her teeth, a desperate, biological threat, but the fight was gone from her. She was simply too exhausted, too cold, too close to the end to defend herself properly. Isaac, maintaining his distance, knelt slowly into the snow. His eyes, sharp from years of tracking, were fixed not on her but on the child. Your kid, he's not breathing right, Isaac stated, observing the terrifying stillness of the boy's chest. Nithril responded with a weak, low growl, a sound that lacked the power to genuinely deter him. Isaac knew he had no time for negotiation. Carefully, slowly, he reached inside the thick, worn coat he wore and pulled out a small metallic object. It was a chemical heat pack. He held it up, making sure she could see it clearly before gently tossing it onto the snow in front of her. The pack lay there, steaming lightly against the frigid ground. Nithril didn't understand the complex human language, but she instantly understood the concept of warmth. It was a primal need, an agonizing absence that this small, strange object seemed to promise to fill. Hesitantly, Nithril reached out, grabbed the pack, and pressed its life-giving heat directly against her son's chest. A minute crawled by, a minute that felt like an eternity. Then Ashkari twitched. He coughed, a soft, weak sound but a sound of life. Nithril's heart, frozen moments before, gave a massive, painful lurch. She looked up at Isaac again, confusion battling the raw, desperate terror in her eyes. Your boy's still alive, Isaac said, his voice quiet but firm. But he won't be for long if you stay out here. You won't make it. Nithril remained frozen, unable to process the foreign concept of pure, unmotivated aid. Isaac pressed on, the necessity of the moment driving him. Come with me, he urged. There's a cabin just a few minutes away. He spoke the universal language of survival, warmth, food. She didn't trust him. Why would she? Her entire life had taught her that kindness was a snare, a prelude to capture and pain. But at that moment, Ashkari shifted weakly in her arms again. And she knew with awful clarity that if she hesitated now, the snow would keep its promise and claim them both before the sun next rose. She pushed herself up slowly, every muscle screaming. She didn't speak a single word, her throat too tight, her language too foreign. She just gave a single hesitant nod. Isaac understood the gravity of the silent agreement. He turned and began walking, leading the way. Nithril followed, clutching Ashkari as if he were her last, most precious stone. Every step forward was a fresh jolt of pain. She couldn't feel her toes, couldn't feel her fingers, but she didn't stop. The human led them not toward an immediate threat, but through a dense cluster of ancient trees and over rolling, snow-covered hills. Finally, a welcome sight appeared in the distance. A small, rough-hewn wooden cabin. Smoke, a visible promise of heat, curled lazily from the chimney, and a faint, buttery light spilled through the small windows. Isaac opened the door just enough to slip in, then stepped aside, allowing her entry. Nithril hesitated on the threshold, her instincts screaming warning, but the light and the smoke were too compelling. She stepped inside. The rush of warm air hit her face, a physical shock she hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. The sudden shift was too much, and she fell to her knees again, this time not from exhaustion, but from the physical shock of relief and warmth. Isaac acted fast, slamming the door shut against the howling storm. He rushed to a cabinet, grabbing thick, woven blankets, and then, with surprising gentleness, he reached for Ashkari. Nithril almost screamed, the primal urge to protect overriding everything. But she watched him. He wasn't rough. He wrapped the boy carefully, tenderly, and placed him close to the crackling fire. He was helping, not hurting. Then Isaac turned and offered a blanket to her. Nithril stared at it, deeply unsure, unable to reconcile this behavior with any lesson she had ever learned. Slowly, with trepidation, she pulled the soft fabric over her shoulders. The fire crackled, a deep, comforting sound. The snowstorm raged outside, a muffled threat, but inside the small, dark cabin, for the first time in what felt like forever, it was truly wonderfully warm. She looked across the room at the human. He wasn't meeting her eyes with the usual mix of fear or hate she was accustomed to. Instead, his expression was one of quiet, unassuming concern. He then offered her a cup, a wooden mug filled with warm, steaming broth. Her hands, still shaking uncontrollably, accepted it. No words passed between them, but in that shared moment of warmth and silence, the first invisible barrier between the alien mother and the human hunter began to dissolve forever. But a lifetime of fear doesn't just melt away with a cup of broth. Nithiril was safe, yes, but her deep-seated suspicion, the ingrained survival mechanism, was still raging. The rush of warmth was alien to Nithiril. Her body, accustomed to the raw, ceaseless pain of the cold of the Stygian peaks, didn't trust this sudden comfort. Her pale blue skin twitched faintly, almost expecting the sharp sting of pain to follow the initial relief. She was safe, yes, but decades of experience and trauma had taught her that safety was merely the bait before the trap. Nithiril remained curled tightly in the corner of the cabin, as far from the human Isaac Thorne as the small space would allow. Her eyes, watchful and unblinking, were fixed intensely on him, like those of a cornered wild animal. Even though Ashkari was already safe, tucked into thick blankets right beside the fire's gentle heat, Nithiril's arms reflexively held the air tight to her chest, mimicking the act of cradling her child. Isaac, a man with tired eyes, a rough beard, and hands that looked strong enough to fell a tree, moved slowly around his cabin. Everything he did, he executed with a deliberate, noticeable care. He was stacking supplies, folding old cloths, placing tools back into their dedicated boxes. He didn't seem scared of her, and crucially, he made no attempt to touch her or cross the invisible boundaries she had established. His only focused movement was checking on Ashkari again. "He's cold, but he'll make it," Isaac muttered, his voice rough and low as he pressed the heating pack back onto the boy's chest. "He just needs time." Nithiril, of course, didn't understand the complex human words. But she understood his hands. They were focused, gentle, and made no move to harm or steal her child. Still, when he reached toward the boy a moment later to adjust the blanket, her caution flared. She let out a low, distinct hiss, a warning sound dragged up from deep in her throat. Isaac immediately paused. He backed away slowly, his palms raised again in the universal sign of surrender and respect. Okay, he conceded softly. "I get it. Protective mama. You're doing your job." Nithiril didn't blink. She couldn't afford to lower her guard. She sat there rigid, observing. Then, a flicker of movement drew her attention back to the child. Ashkari, still terribly weak, let out a shallow breath, a soft sound like a whisper of steam. His tiny fingers shifted almost imperceptibly under the heavy blanket. Nithiril's frantic heart hammered against her ribs. She leaned down, her own claws trembling, and gently brushed his cheek. "My little one, you're still here," she whispered in her native tongue, the relief so intense it manifested as a tear that slid from her eye and immediately froze on her cold cheek. Isaac watched this profound, silent moment from across the room, giving her space. He then moved toward the small stove, beginning to prepare something warm. Within minutes, the cabin was filled with the savory scent of herbs and broth. Nithiril smelled it, and her empty stomach responded with a loud, embarrassing rumble. She ignored it, clinging to her discipline. Isaac returned with a simple wooden bowl of steaming food. Slowly, deliberately, he placed it on the floor halfway between them, then stepped back again, hands raised. "Eat," he instructed gently. "It's not poisoned, I promise." Nithiril looked at the food with profound suspicion. Steam rose, invitingly warm. Her mind screamed trap, the old lessons of her traumatic life dominating her thoughts. But her body remembered hunger, a deep, agonizing, painful hunger that had taken up residence in her very bones. She crept forward, painfully slow, her eyes never leaving Isaac. She finally took the bowl. She sniffed the contents, then dipped one trembling claw in and tasted it. Her eyes widened. It was warm. It was soft. It was not poison. The mental barrier collapsed under the weight of her body's desperate need. She began to eat quickly, without grace or shame, driven purely by the instinct of survival. Isaac didn't laugh or stare. He simply smiled, a small, genuine smile, and nodded. "Good," he murmured. After a few frantic bites, Nithiril paused. She whispered something, a gentle word in her language, to Ashkari. She carefully placed a small spoon near his mouth, hoping he would react, but his lips didn't move. Nithril froze, leaning closer. Still nothing. Breathe. Breathe, she pleaded, gently shaking him. Please. When he didn't respond, true, blinding panic hit her like a lightning strike. Her eyes went wide with paralyzing fear. She let out a harsh growl and whipped her head around toward Isaac. Her claws instantly extended, ready to fight the man she assumed had let her child die. Isaac understood the panic instantly. He rushed forward. Nithril screamed, pushing him back, trying desperately to stop him, but he pointed directly at the silent, still boy. Let me help. Nithril looked at her son, motionless and silent, and the fight drained out of her. She dropped her defensive stance. Isaac knelt, not wasting a second. He pulled a small, sleek scanner from his coat, advanced technology disguised as common gear. A blue light swept across the boy's chest and face. He pressed 2 fingers to Ashkari's neck. No pulse. No, no, no. Not yet, Isaac whispered in denial. He dropped his pack and pulled out a thin metallic rod that unfolded instantly. It was a small military-grade oxygen injector. He pressed the device to the boy's delicate neck and clicked it. There was a soft, sharp hiss and a pulse of brilliant green light. Ashkari twitched violently. Then he gasped, a weak, slow, ragged breath. Nithril let out a cry that was a complex mix of blinding joy and physical shock. Isaac let out his own breath, whispering, "Close one." The mother dropped to her knees, clutching her son with desperate gratitude. She rested her head on his small chest, focusing on the beautiful, simple rhythm of his faint but real heartbeat. She looked up at Isaac again. Her eyes were still guarded, but the deep, foundational hate was gone, replaced by something new and complex. Isaac sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're welcome," he said softly, a simple, true statement. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the sentiment perfectly. She simply nodded. A long silence settled, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Ashkari coughed gently and shifted under the blankets. Then, for the very first time, Nithril performed an act of reciprocal kindness. She pulled the blanket from her own shoulders and gently placed it over Isaac's coat near the fire. A small, wordless gesture, but its meaning was perfectly clear. Thank you. The fire danced and the cabin was quiet, safe and still despite the raging storm outside. But Nithril, the wild animal, still sat on edge. She had eaten and her child was breathing, but peace, the true cessation of fear, had not yet arrived. She stared at the wooden walls and the closed door, every slow footstep Isaac took, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, sending a paralyzing thought through her mind. Now he will hurt me. Now is the trap. He is only waiting. Back on her distant world, kindness was always a trick. First the food, then the warmth, then the pain and subjugation. Isaac, however, simply continued to move around his cabin, whistling a soft, tuneless sound as he worked. The sound deeply confused Nithril. Was he happy? Was he truly safe? Or was this just part of the sophisticated human trap? Nithril's fears were deep, rooted in a past far darker than the blizzard outside. But Isaac Thorne's next move, a final, definitive attempt to earn her trust by completely lowering his own guard, would determine everything. Would she stay and risk the trap or run back into the killing snow? And lurking in the darkness of the Stygian peaks, something far more dangerous than the storm was already tracking them down. Nithril was safe. Ashkari was breathing. The fire was warm. Yet the alien mother remained frozen in place, utterly still. To her, this safety felt profoundly unnatural, an agonizing waiting game. She knew the logic. Humans didn't offer help without exacting a severe price. They took tribute, demanded servitude, or worse, they delivered you to those who would pay more. The kindness of Isaac Thorne was, in her experience, merely a well-placed hook. She watched him across the cabin. Isaac had finished his chores, but instead of demanding payment or setting the terms of her captivity, he did something completely unexpected. He began to dismantle the only defense he had. He moved to the small table and began laying out all of his weaponry. First, his hunting rifle. Then his energy pistol. Then his small, razor-sharp survival knife. He placed them carefully on the wooden surface, well within her sight line, then slowly, deliberately, he moved to the corner of the cabin farthest from her and Ashkari and sat down. Nithril's multifaceted eyes tracked every single movement. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Was this a test? A trick of immense psychological warfare? Isaac leaned his head back against the cold wooden wall and closed his tired eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He simply rested, making himself vulnerable. He was literally asleep, leaving his entire arsenal unguarded and exposed. This was the ultimate move of trust. Nithero could, in theory, crawl across the floor, snatch the knife, and end the human's life without a sound. She could take the rifle, take the food, and disappear back into the blizzard of the Stygian peaks. But she remained frozen, the internal conflict a war of its own. Her primal survival instinct urged her to strike now, while she had the advantage, but the memory of his hands, the hands that saved her child, held her back. Hours crawled by, marked only by the shifting shadows of the fire. Ashkari stirred, letting out a small, soft, complaining sound. Nithril immediately went to him, her trauma temporarily forgotten. She held him, murmuring soothing words in her language, gently smoothing the fur on his head. The stirring woke Isaac. He opened his eyes, immediately looking at the mother and child. Nithril tensed, expecting him to react to the noise. But he didn't move from his position. He simply looked at them, then back at his weapons, then back at them. A moment passed in perfect silence, a moment of profound, simple recognition. He had placed his life in her hands and she had chosen not to take it. "He's still tired," Isaac said quietly, his voice a low hum. He then pointed to a small, worn data pad near his feet. "I'm going to sleep for a bit. If you need me, just wake me up." He then closed his eyes again, resuming his sleep. Nithril was left reeling. This was not the behavior of a captor. This was the behavior of a genuine protector. The fear that had held her captive for so long finally began to recede, replaced by a devastating, raw confusion. Why risk so much for two complete strangers? She eventually allowed herself to relax slightly, her gaze softening. She watched the human sleep, observing the gentle rise and fall of his chest. He was just a man, tired, old, and surprisingly kind. But the night's reprieve was not destined to last. As the hours passed and the blizzard finally began to weaken, a new, more sinister sound began to drift into the quiet cabin. The distinct, mechanical whir of hovercraft engines, faint at first, then growing louder, cutting through the residual wind. Nitheril's head snapped up, her relaxation instantly vaporizing. She knew that sound. It was the sound of the hunters. They were the ones who had tracked her across the galaxy, the ones who had destroyed her home, the ones she had fled from across countless systems. She scrambled to her feet, her body immediately reverting to survival mode. She rushed to Isaac and roughly shook him awake, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed frantically at the door, then outside. Isaac's eyes snapped open. He was instantly alert, his hunter's training kicking in. He didn't hesitate. He heard the engines, low-frequency vibrations that signaled advanced, heavy-duty tracking equipment. These were not local rangers or simple search and rescue. This was something dangerous. "They found you," Isaac stated grimly, scrambling to grab his rifle from the table. Nithril didn't need a translator. She grabbed Ashkari, wrapping him fiercely in a blanket, preparing to bolt back into the relative safety of the cold, but Isaac stopped her. "No," he said, shaking his head firmly. "The snow is too open now. They'll see your trail." He looked around his small, rustic home. "We fight here. This house is defensible." Nithril let out a sharp, anxious cry and desperately pulled at his arm, urging him toward the back window, away from the imminent threat. "Run." Her entire being screamed. Running is the only way to survive. But Isaac held her gaze, his tired eyes now hard and resolute. "I am not leaving," he said, the words clear even if the language was foreign. "You are safe here. I gave you my word. I will not break it." He quickly moved to the windows, covering them with thick, wooden shutters. The cabin plunged into darkness, save for the weak glow of the embers. Nithril felt a crushing wave of despair. Why was this human, this total stranger, choosing to fight a battle that wasn't his? Why was he risking his life, his home, everything for her and Ashkari? It defied all the laws of nature and society she had ever known. Isaac flinched, but only slightly. They knew his name. This wasn't a random encounter. They were professionals. They had been tracking her, and now, by simple association, they were hunting him. The whine of the hovercraft grew deafeningly loud, now directly outside the cabin. A thick, blinding spotlight punched through a tiny gap in the shutters, illuminating the interior with a terrifying intensity. A harsh, metallic voice boomed from external speakers, heavily filtered and distorted. "Isaac K. Thorne. Stand down and surrender the asset. Your cooperation is mandatory. You are harboring a fugitive." He turned to Nithril, his face a mask of determined resolve. He knelt down, placed his rifle next to his leg and spoke softly, pointing to a small dark crawl space beneath the floorboards near the fireplace. You go there. Don't make a sound. Don't come out. I will draw their attention. He was telling her his plan: hide and survive while he faced the immediate threat alone. Nithril hesitated, looking at her savior, the human who had given her warmth, food, and the life of her son, now preparing to sacrifice his own life for them. She quickly ushered Ashkari into the cramped, dark space, tucking him in tightly. She hesitated, looking back at Isaac. He just gave her a simple, unwavering nod. He picked up his rifle, checked the charge, and moved toward the door. The sound of heavy, armored boots landing outside confirmed the danger. They were here. And Isaac Thorne was ready. The battle for the Stygian Peaks was about to begin. Isaac Thorne was about to pay the ultimate price for his kindness, but Nithril was done running. She couldn't stay hidden while the one man who had shown her true humanity fought to the death for her survival. Her loyalty, forged in the snow and sealed by an act of selfless trust, would not allow it. The world outside the small cabin of Isaac Thorne had gone from a quiet, white hell to an organized, tactical threat. The heavy crunch of armored boots was now right on the threshold. Nithril, huddled in the dark crawl space with Ashkari, could hear every horrifying sound. The thrumming of the hovercraft was a pulse of doom against the wooden walls. Isaac stood tall in the middle of his cabin, the dim light of the dying fire reflecting off his rifle. He took a deep, steadying breath. This wasn't a fight for sport or survival. This was a defense of a profound, sudden principle. He had offered safety, and he would uphold that offer even if it cost him everything. A loud, metallic crash announced the entry of the attackers. The front door didn't just open. It was ripped violently from its hinges by some heavy-duty breaching tool. 3 figures in dark, sleek, armored uniforms stormed into the cabin. These were the professional hunters, not human but specialized mercenaries, wearing heavy plates and optical sensors that glowed a cold, menacing red. "Where is the asset, Thorne?" the lead hunter barked, his voice distorted through a helmet speaker. He carried a heavy energy weapon, which he immediately leveled at Isaac's chest. Isaac didn't flinch. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "This is private property. Turn around and leave." The hunter commander laughed, a dry, grating sound. "The alien mother is a valuable fugitive. We know she's here. Give her up and we'll let you keep your miserable shack." Isaac felt a deep, slow burn of rage. They saw Nithril and Ashkari not as individuals, but as assets, property to be bought and sold. This mercenary arrogance fueled his determination. "There's no one here but me," Isaac lied, shifting slightly, putting his body squarely between the hunters and the fireplace where Nithril was hiding. The commander signaled his 2 subordinates. Riflemen searched the perimeter. Specialists checked the corners. As the mercenaries began their sweep, Isaac knew his window was closing. He had to act. He had to draw their focus entirely onto himself. The rifleman mercenary paused, noticing the small wooden datapad on the table. He reached out to grab it, a simple, tactical blunder. Isaac moved with the speed of a man used to surviving on instinct. He didn't shoot the rifleman. Instead, he fired a single, powerful round from his rifle directly into the ground between the mercenary and the commander. The shot didn't hit anyone, but the flash and the thunderous noise of the high-caliber round inside the enclosed space were deafening. Chaos erupted. The rifleman staggered back. The commander instinctively ducked. "He's hostile," the commander shouted, immediately opening fire. Plasma bolts tore into the walls, vaporizing chunks of wood and sending sparks flying across the floor. Isaac was already moving, diving behind the overturned stove. He returned fire, targeting the optical sensors on the commander's helmet. He knew he couldn't penetrate the heavy armor, but he could blind the lead attacker. The commander roared in frustration as his optics shattered. He began firing wildly, tearing up the cabin's interior. The specialist mercenary who was checking the far corner rushed back, ready to flank Isaac. This is it, Isaac thought. He had bought maybe 20 seconds. Enough time to draw them to him and away from the crawl space. Meanwhile, under the floorboards, Nithril was undergoing her own transformation. The sound of the weapon's fire, the shouts, the sheer violence, it was a horrific replay of the past trauma she had tried desperately to escape. Ashkari, terrified, whimpered softly, clutching his mother's hand. But then Nithril heard Isaac's voice above the noise, clear and defiant, even though she couldn't understand the language. She heard the single powerful crack of his rifle, and the frantic, enraged shouts of the mercenaries. She recognized the rhythm of the conflict. A single, brave, flawed protector fighting against overwhelming force for her sake. She realized with perfect, painful clarity, Isaac Thorne was not her captor. He was her defender. He was dying for her. The ingrained, trauma-based instinct to run was suddenly, violently overridden by a deeper, newer emotion: loyalty. She would not leave this man to die alone. She owed him her son's life, and now he was staking his own life on the belief that she was worth saving. "Stay," she whispered to Ashkari, pressing him firmly against the dirt floor. She didn't wait for his reaction. With a surge of strength she didn't know she possessed, Nithril pushed open the flimsy wooden cover of the crawl space. She emerged, her blue skin shimmering in the faint light, her posture instantly shifting from that of a terrified animal to a warrior mother. Isaac was pinned down, his back to her, exchanging fire with the now blinded commander and the flanking specialist. He was hit. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, making him grunt in pain, but he held his position. Nithril didn't have a weapon, but she had agility and sheer, desperate will. She saw Isaac's discarded survival knife, lying on the floor near the overturned chair, the very knife he had left unguarded hours earlier. Moving like a shadow, low and fast, she scooped up the knife. The specialist mercenary saw the flash of movement and turned, raising his energy weapon. "Asset spotted. Target neutralized," he yelled into the comms. But Nithril was faster. Driven by the image of her son's safe and Isaac's selfless face, she threw herself at the specialist. The knife found the unarmored joint of the mercenary's neck, just below the helmet. The specialist let out a choked, sputtering gasp as his weapon discharged into the ceiling. The noise of the specialist collapsing made the commander look up. He saw Nithril, bloody knife in hand, standing over his fallen comrade. Isaac, seeing the distraction, took his shot. He aimed not for the commander's chest, but for the energy relay pack on his back. The rifle round impacted the pack with a sickening thud, and the commander let out a high-pitched scream as the pack short-circuited in a shower of sparks and smoke. The third mercenary, the rifleman, was still outside, but the sudden silence in the cabin signaled the fight was over. He turned and fled back toward the hovercraft, unwilling to face the unexpected, ferocious defense. Nithril turned immediately to Isaac. He was leaning heavily against the wall, clutching his grazed shoulder. He looked at her, the alien mother who had risked her life to fight for him. You stayed," he gasped, his human language still incomprehensible to her, but the meaning of the words clear in his expression. Nithril walked over to him, her breathing ragged, the knife dropping with a clatter onto the floor. She placed her trembling, clawed hand on his good shoulder. The fight was over. For now. The wreckage of Isaac Thorne's small cabin was silent, save for the crackle of the dying embers. 2 mercenaries lay defeated, and the third had fled with a terrifying message. The hunter of the Stygian peaks was fiercely protecting his new charges. Isaac, bruised and bleeding from the plasma graze on his shoulder, slowly, painfully stabilized the room. Nithril, the alien mother, emerged from the high tension of the fight with a renewed purpose. She quickly secured the small opening to the crawl space, where Ashkari was still huddled, and then she turned her attention to the human. She gestured toward his wound, her expression one of deep, urgent concern. Isaac waved a dismissive hand, trying to act tough, but the pain was evident in the tightening of his jaw. He eventually sat down heavily on a broken bench, leaning his head back against the shattered wall. Nithril knelt beside him. She didn't have human medical knowledge, but she possessed the primal, intuitive healing skills of her own people. She gently pressed her hand near the wound. She then moved to a small, untouched section of the pantry and found a clean, white strip of cloth, which she carefully tore into a bandage. Without a single shared word, Nithril cleaned and bound his wound. Her movements were focused, precise, and utterly without fear or hesitation. She was no longer the cornered, terrified alien. She was a healer, a defender, and now a caretaker. Isaac watched her work, his expression softening into one of profound acceptance. "You didn't have to fight for us," Isaac finally said, his voice raspy. He didn't expect her to understand the words, only the sentiment. He gestured around the ruined cabin. "Now look at this place. They found me anyway." He saw a faint, almost imperceptible smile touch the corner of Nithril's lips. She looked directly into his eyes and spoke a single, quiet word in her native tongue, which he could not translate, but whose meaning was unmistakable: choice. Isaac sighed, stirring the remains of the stew he had prepared hours earlier. "Didn't I?" he asked, answering his own question. "Most people, they would have walked away. Left you in the snow." He said it without judgment, simply as a statement of fact about the cold nature of the galaxy. I'm not most people. Nithril leaned forward, her eyes soft but intelligent. She touched his cheek gently. She saw the exhaustion, but she also saw a new light in his eyes, a light of purpose she hadn't seen before the blizzard. You've changed, she communicated silently, her expression clear. Isaac nodded slowly. So have you, he replied. They looked at each other then, truly seeing one another for the first time. There was no fear, no masks, no pretense, just a deep, mutual understanding forged in the terror of the storm and the heat of battle. Just then a small, soft pattering of footsteps broke the intimate silence. Ashkari, the little one, finally emerged from the crawl space. He looked around at the chaos, the ruined cabin, and the silent, wounded human, then at his mother. He was scared but not hysterical. He walked past his mother and, without hesitation or asking permission, climbed right into Isaac's lap. He rested his small, furry head against the human man's chest. Isaac froze. This was a physical intimacy he had never expected, never prepared for. He was a solitary hunter, a man of quiet routine and isolation. He hadn't touched another living being with such simple, innocent trust in years. Ashkari looked up at him, blinking his enormous, dark eyes slowly. The room was suddenly completely still. You're my father now, right? Ashkari asked, the words clear even if they were still slightly slurred by exhaustion and the trauma. Nithril gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hand. She hadn't expected the child to comprehend the magnitude of Isaac's actions and bestow such a profound title. Isaac looked down at the boy, speechless. His mouth opened but no words came. He was ready to fight armies, but this small, simple question rendered him utterly defenseless. Ashkari held tighter, his small arms wrapping around Isaac's neck. You saved us, the boy insisted. You stayed. You fight monsters. Mama smiles now. So you're my father. That's what it means. Isaac's chest ached in a way no wound from the hunters had ever caused. It was a searing, beautiful pain of overwhelming emotion. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, then gently placed a massive, calloused hand on the boy's small, shaking back. The touch was tentative at first, then firm and filled with a love he didn't know he was capable of. Yeah, Isaac whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I guess I am. Nithril let out a soft cry. A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't a tear of cold or sorrow, it was a tear of pure, overwhelming gratitude and love. That night, the ruined cabin held something new, something deeper than mere survival. It held family. They didn't need papers or laws or blood to define it. They just had choice. The human had chosen the alien mother and her child, and they, in turn, had chosen him. As the last stars blinked above the towering Stygian peaks and the forest settled back into its winter quiet, a new life began. A little alien boy slept soundly, tucked between his alien mother and his human father. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, unbreakable bond. The hunter who had only known how to take life now understood the profound, redemptive power of saving it. And that, my friends, is the incredible true story of Isaac Thorne, Nithril, and Ashkari, a family forged not by blood, but by the relentless choice to show kindness in the face of absolute despair. If this story of redemption, loyalty, and unexpected love in the icy depths of the Stygian peaks touched your heart, please do two things for me right now. First, smash that like button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that humanity can be found in the most unlikely of places. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. We are committed to bringing you more emotional, powerful sci-fi storytelling every single week. Second, I want to hear from you. What was the most impactful moment for you? Was it Isaac's ultimate act of trust, or Ashkari's simple, perfect question? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to check out the channel playlist right here for more stories that will make you feel everything. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of our audience. Until the next story, may your journeys be safe, and may you always choose kindness. Good wishes to you all.